Good morning, afternoon to everyone, and welcome to the panel about business trends in marine conservation. We are very excited today to have a discussion about those business trends on marine conservation. And this is based on a report that IDB Invest launched during this year about unlocking sustainable blue economy in Latin America and the Caribbean. This was launched in Barbados, and the idea of this report highlights what are the business opportunities and the business models that, from one hand, are able to maintain and preserve nature and the ocean, and from the other side, create economic benefits. So the idea of this panel is to explore these new models and to see what are the key takeaways so that private investors can play a significant role in the marine conservation as well, and create new business opportunities that are, from one hand financially viable, and from the other side also preserve our oceans that are critical. For that, I have a fabulous panel with me, and I would like to introduce all of them. First of all, Divya Mankikar, sorry, I need my glasses. That is Senior Director and Global Head of Market Engagement of Sustainability at Standard & Poor's Global. She has extensive experience in sustainable investment. Thank you very much for joining us, Lydia. We have also with us Maximiliano Bello, that is Policy Advisor for Ocean Blues, and he has a long trajectory on marine conservation, but also in forest conservation. Welcome, Maximiliano. And sorry, Jamie Mansfield from Financier, that is co-founder and managing director, and is a reference in conservation and impact investment. Welcome, all of you. So let's start this discussion, and let me start with Maximiliano. No, I'm looking to the right person. So, Maximiliano, I would like to start from the beginning. And could you please tell us and explain us what is the role that oceans are playing in the fight against climate change and in the sustainable development?
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you very much for the IDB Invest to invite me here, and it's a pleasure to be with you guys here and on this panel. So first of all, I think it's important. And I love actually what IDB is doing, because it's critical that we recognize the ocean. As you know, for 25 years in the negotiations, the oceans wasn't present. Just 3 years ago, the oceans became part of the discussion of climate change. And this is a little bit crazy, because if you think about the planet, the fact that we have a blue sky, the fact that we have actually an atmosphere, the fact that we have a climate that we are arguing to fix it is because of the ocean. Life in the ocean have actually been producing the atmosphere and the conditions for humans to actually thrive and do pretty well. And we've been all of these days in this incredible place, and where we have become to this point in history, it's because of the ocean. So first of all is the recognition that the ocean is the source of life, the source of oxygen, the biggest sinking ecosystem on Earth. It is critical. And then once we recognize that and we recognize the protection of the ocean, then we can think of a different way to look at it and to do business in a different way. And so I really appreciate and I really thank and congratulate the IDB for thinking of the ocean in a different way in this context.
Thank you very much. I would like to move now to Jamie. And taking into account the importance of the oceans that we have seen regarding to Maximiliano, I would like to see if you can outline a practical example of different business models and how this works, how we can create business opportunities, but at the same time with including social development, but at the same time preserve our oceans.
Absolutely, and likewise, an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you for IDB Invest for organising today. So the really exciting thing about the ocean is the absolute amazing variety of products, services that it provides society already. And so when you think about that from an investing perspective, there are already an enormous amount of opportunities to invest profitably within the ocean. However, many of those activities can also have really damaging and quite negative consequences, not just on the environment, but also on local communities. And so when we look at how we balance those and look for business models that balance all of those dynamics, there's clearly a bit of looking for a sort of a needle in a haystack, as it were, occasionally. However, there are many that do meet all of those elements. One area that a lot of the, indeed even at COP, there's a huge amount of excitement is around ecosystem services and the role of carbon, and clearly blue carbon is an incredibly attractive opportunity. And in fact, if you look at the blue carbon investments, many of them are very profitable. However, one of the areas that we're very excited by, particularly at Finance Earth, is when we look at supply chains. And particularly when you look at the real challenges, when you look at wild fisheries, and how do you move wild fisheries towards sustainability. And so one of these mechanisms that we've been co-developing with our partners at WWF, and the pilot is now going through in Chile, is for the creation of a financing mechanism to support the creation and management of fishery improvement projects. And so this mechanism allows you to create a levy on the fishery, working with those fishery off-takers to then actually create a cash flow that then you can invest against that cash flow and invest in interventions which meaningfully improve the sustainability of that fishery. Better education of the fishers, quotas, improved fishing gear, fishing hardware, and pulling that together into a governance structure and a financing mechanism that critically no individual partner pays for. Actually, it allows you to transfer those costs through the supply chain. And so all of a sudden in this mechanism, you are not just having a series of off-takers such as Cargill paying for that, and that coming at a cost to their, as an expense to their P&L. They are actually able to transfer those costs through the supply chain, ultimately through to the customer, because of the overall improvement of the sustainability of those fisheries. And so for me, one of the really exciting things, not just within those fisheries, but just more broadly, is how do you start pricing in the true cost of business to deliver those services, to deliver those commodities sustainably, and then pricing that into the actual cost of delivery. So that's just one example. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. This is extremely interesting, especially this part related to pricing the cost of business. So I would like to move to Divya. And Divya, I mean, you have a strong experience in impact investing and sustainable investment. And you know that a private sector, when they are trying to invest or they are trying to decide or take an investment decision into a project, for them, data is critical. They need information and they should be informed business decision. So I know that you have been working a lot on that. So I would like to share with the rest of the audience, what are the things that you are doing to really fill this information gap?
Sure, and I wanted to share the thanks for IDB maybe second or even third time inviting me to be on a panel at COP, so in successive COPs, so it's nice to always join this group. We have done a few different things around nature and biodiversity at S&P Sustainable One. So the first is we've been speaking with investors for years about their interest in understanding how their portfolios might be exposed to nature and biodiversity risk. But when you look at an investment portfolio, unless you're doing project finance for pretty much every other asset class, you have very little information about where your constituent companies in an index or, real assets are actually based. And so what we did is take some of the asset level data that we have for other purposes, for tracking commodity supply chains, for example, for years, and repurposed it for nature and biodiversity analysis. And what we did is work with the UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Center and actually overlay our physical data on pipelines and mines and retail banking locations, like every kind of physical asset, not every kind, but many kinds of physical assets that are owned by companies, 2 conservation areas. So we overlaid these 2 maps so that for the first time, we are able to give investors the ability to look at their portfolio and actually see where are the companies operating and are they operating in key biodiversity areas, for example. So this is really different, I think, for investors to have that level of visibility into the physical operations of the companies that they invest in. And then they use that information for a variety of different things. Some are, I mean, few at this point, it's very nascent, but are setting targets that they don't want to invest in companies that have a negative impact on key biodiversity areas. So now they can actually see who are those companies. Others, more of them are engaging companies to understand how they might be able to adapt their, operations. So these are just some of the ways that we're trying to use data to shed light on this subject in a way that actually investors can make use of the information.
Thank you very much. So we have seen the new business models that Jamie has explained. We have talked as well about what is needed to take those investment decisions, but I would like to move to another part that is more the social impact and the social development. And then I'm going to ask you, Massimiliano, because when we think about ocean conservation in Latin America, Jamie talked about fishermen. This is small fishermen, this is critical. So I don't know if you can share any business model, anything that is relevant on how to integrate the social dimension into this type of business product.
Thank you. And I appreciate also, I love both interventions because it all makes it. And what is important also is that conservation is not apart from that question of social. And that is critical that we put all together. Because the ecosystems are the base for any of the business. There's no business or there's no jobs in a dead planet. And so one of the things is, for example, for fisheries, it is important that we recognize that we don't harvest. It's not like you don't go and seed with fish. The fish are actually mated by the ocean, but only by a healthy ocean. And so to account actually, and the externalization of the business, basically the fishermen put a price on the fish once it's dead. But what is the price of the fish when it's alive, actually? What you need, what are the pieces of it? And so for that, you need the information and actually, and I love the critical space of actually how companies are thinking differently on where to do it, where not to do it, because that is also very key, no? And so we need to kind of combine the whole thing because people are using the ecosystems. And to that also it's important that we realize that it's not only fishermen. It's not the only thing that we take from the ocean. It's not just fish. It is oxygen. It's like sinking carbon. And then you can see also other activities that might be related. There's also tourism that keeps growing. One of the biggest activities. It's ecotourism for one side. Is the normal tourism as we know, but it's another key, and in particular in Latin America. And then now we are seeing another part that is very critical, which is the conservation. As pure as we're going to call it, preservation, kind of like the marine protected areas. Latin America is currently the leader on marine protection. We saw Panama, Costa Rica, Colombia, and Ecuador. They just, been working together. It's the first time that multilateralism is working to protect one ecosystem that is connected, no? And that is an incredible example. And just look at the numbers on how much private sector, philanthropy, IDB, CAF, Bezos Foundation, GEF, the European Union just mentioned a couple of days ago how much money they're going to also put on that. The US, Ecuador did a debt swap for $1.5 billion for the expansion of Galapagos. Those are also numbers in terms of money and how can help the communities. Not only to keep thinking in the same way we've been thinking of taking, but also maybe diversifying the activities. And there's plenty that can be done. And maybe if we can start thinking of a nature positive. So not just to extract, but actually to change the way and to those businesses should not affect nature, but actually how we can improve nature in a way. I think that's the key.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And Jamie, we've heard from Latin America, but I think that there are many other experiences in other parts of the world, and it would be very good to share best practices in this space. But I would like to also see some of those experiences in other parts of the world, but especially if you can really identify what are the roles and opportunities that other relevant actors like government and the financial institutions can play. What they need to do to really unlock this enormous opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, even earlier today, talking with colleagues, discussing the role of bankable projects, and there's a huge amount of discussion about how do you create bankable, investable opportunities that can deliver the right risk-return profile to bring in investors. And right at this sort of crux that we're going through at the moment, there's a really critical role for both investors and the public sector to collaborate. And so before I go into sort of separate areas and separate roles, I think the first point is that this whole sector requires collaboration between the private investment world and the public sector to be able to bridge some of those gaps. Many of the barriers we see, not just within Latin America, but internationally elsewhere, and certainly even in Europe, is around how do we build the evidence base to demonstrate the robustness of a particular business model, and to demonstrate that the revenue streams, the cash flows are viable and replicable going into the future, and hence eventually becoming bankable. And one of the real sort of key opportunities for the public sector is in the provision of that, what we would call investment readiness support, to catalyze and support the many entrepreneurs that are working through these business models, and actually providing sort of a sandbox environment, allowing them to have the basically patient funding to trial, and quite often not all of those trials will always work, but actually creating those models that actually then they can learn and innovate from, and recognizing that the investment in those is actually building the evidence base, building the understanding of what does and doesn't work. And critically, when we're looking at nature and the role of restoration programs and conservation with society, there are so many multifaceted elements with community at the heart of them. And so designing structures, building the right governance models, that is also a really critical part for the public sector, to support the private sector in doing that in a patient way, and ensuring that communities are held within the center of project design. The other part, beyond sort of catalyzing and building that investment readiness support, which is sort of the enabling environment, helping to create more of these projects to come through, is also to codify and to work with the private sector to codify what does good quality really look like? What are the targets that we're trying to aim for? How do we judge a good project versus a bad project? What does that mean when we're looking at conservation? How do we share those lessons, and how do we create an environment in a non-competitive way that allows the private sector to share those? Because that's the other sort of challenge that the private sector suffers, is that clearly there's a competitive element to this, and coming through from a private investment world, we need to be able to share lessons, and we need an environment which encourages that sharing and rewards that sharing. And so again, that's, I think, a really key part for the public sector to support that. In terms of the private investors and their role, clearly the first piece is willing to engage in these models, is the willingness to create teams to actually build up internal resource. When you speak to asset managers and asset owners in the traditional private development finance world, when you start to bridge that into the nature-based solution world, there is a huge knowledge gap. And that knowledge gap can only be closed over time by them building up internal teams over time and actually building internal resource. And so there's a really critical role for institutional investors to build up some of that internal expertise. And in the short term, they need to work with partners to bring that in-house quickly. The other piece, I would say, is the willingness of the private investor community to work with blended finance. A lot of investors are actually incredibly conservative that we work with, and the willingness to look at blended finance can be really challenging. And so actually the openness to be able to engage in models where you've got multiple tiers of capital structures that incentivize more outcomes than just the financial return, that's also I think a really sort of key mind shift that private investors need to go through. Happy to explore that further though, if there's questions on that.
No, I think that's super interesting. But Jamie, could you please share with us, I mean, talking to you and showing what are the best practices, sorry for the audience, this is a lot of noise in here, but what could be the area not in Latin America and the rest of the world that can be considered like a best practice, or where people that want to get into this type of investment need to have a look at?
So looking for best practice?
Yes, with the
So, I mean, I would say there are many projects that are being created at the moment, clearly around Latin America for rainforest protection schemes, and the ones that we are seeing that are most successful, and in the marine space as well, are the ones where indigenous communities are at the heart of those solutions. And so clearly that is becoming, within COP as well, just a much broader awareness and understanding. And I would say that's one of the critical ingredients where they are not just seen as a sort of stakeholder group, they are actually seen as part of the core project itself. And so I think that's a critical ingredient that we're starting to see more and more replicated across structures more broadly.
No, thank you very much. I mean, we have been working in IDB Invest with one of our clients is Banco Bolivariano in the first blue bond, and we were working, helping them to really for the issuance of the bond and the implementing TNFD. You know that you have been an active member of TNFD, Divya, and I would like to see what are the challenges and opportunities that financial institutions are addressing when they try to implement TNFD and then to apply to blue projects. And in addition to that, I would like to see what are the opportunities to incorporate nature in business solution or in investment decisions, because I think it's something that is still a little bit difficult for many of the private sector.
Yeah, thank you. So, as you mentioned, I'm an alternate task force member for the TNFD. So for the past 2 years, I've been really in the weeds helping to build out the TNFD framework that launched in September. And what we have learned in all those consultations that the TNFD went through is really the depth of capacity. I mean, we learned many things, but the thing that sticks out most to me is the momentum behind nature rising to the top of the agenda of, the top 5 sustainability issues that clients are talking to us about. It happened very fast, much faster than any of us really expected, but there's so much capacity building that really needs to happen for investors to understand what it means to address nature in an investment decision. So the TNFD is really helpful, because it follows the TCFD framework, so it's familiar, but also to hone in on, for example, to your second question, why is nature a financial risk? What are the different ways in which nature shows up for an investor as a financial risk? And then how do you actually systematically then go about understanding your own exposure, managing it, disclosing upon it? So key to the TNFD that's different from the TCFD is this new approach called, well, it's not new, but it's a, an enhancement from the TCFD. It's called LEAP, which is locate, evaluate, assess, prepare. And that location specificity is really important in nature and biodiversity. And it's one of the areas that we end up talking to investors a lot about, because it's not necessarily something that's second nature, like yes for real assets investors, yes for certain types, but understanding how the location of the asset really impacts the nature impact and dependency. This is something that there's a lot of capacity building that we're doing, and then understanding what are the metrics then that they should be looking at. And in some of those cases, there are metrics that they've been looking at, like water scarcity or carbon emissions. But in others, mean species abundance, for example, is one of the ones that was mentioned earlier today, looking at species biodiversity. This is a new topic. So the idea of linking biodiversity to an investment decision, it sounds appealing, but the nitty-gritty of it, there's a lot of knowledge sharing and capacity building that we do with investors to get them comfortable with it. Because ultimately, they not only need to feel capable to integrate it into the decision, but also to be able to explain it to their board, to their client, to external stakeholders. And so that takes an even more greater level of comfort with this data. I think the good news is it is happening quickly. We worked with GPIF, for example, who's the biggest asset owner in the world. They're one of the pension funds for Japan, more than 1.7 trillion in assets, and they've already done a pilot TNFD analysis with us, where they found that I believe it was 65% of their public equity portfolio companies were highly dependent on nature. So these kinds of examples help the rest of the market to understand, okay, this is a big topic that we need to start managing. And then we're helping to support them in understanding what does that mean, what are the metrics, what are the tools that enable them to be able to do that.
Thank you very much, and thank you, all of you, because you have been very responsible in terms of timing. So we still have time. We still have time for one last question, and I am thinking about the audience. I mean, we have audience from all over the world, and we have audience with different backgrounds representing the public sector, the private sector, private companies, research, consultancy firms. So I would like to go one quick round with all of you. And I'm going to ask you, what message, a short message, I don't know, 2 minutes, will you send to all of these people or to a specific group of them in terms of, guys, this is possible. It's possible to maintain our oceans and to create financially viable projects, and that have also a component of social inclusion. So I'm going to start
well, I was actually, to your question, and when I was hearing Maximiliano speak earlier about how Latin America really is a leader globally in thinking about marine conservation and business models around that. So not my S&P world, or role, but even previously in my career, I worked on a project in Chile that was protecting critical habitat for blue whales, and another project in Ecuador that was looking at different ways of organic shrimp farming in order to make the industry more resilient and have a lower impact on nature and biodiversity. So just from my little narrow view, these projects I've seen happen in Latin America more than in other parts of the world. So I just wanted to underline what you were saying, that it suddenly clicked in my head, like even in my career, the marine conservation projects I've had the ability to be part of have exclusively been in Latin America. And so I definitely see that leadership just from my purview. And all of those projects were trying to find ways to monetize the benefit of conservation, either through ecotourism or a more resilient industry, or different ways of finding either cost reductions or revenue opportunities that come from conservation. So it's good to see that leadership.
Well, thank you very much. This is very inspiring, very, very inspiring for all of us. And I would like to really give the floor to Jamie for this last message from your side.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, first of all, I'd say do read the report. So I presume we'll share a link on the report that really explores the many opportunities that are there in Latin America for investing in the marine and our ocean environment. I think for me the key message is there is an enormous amount of benefits we already receive from our ocean. And because of the diversity and the scale of those benefits and services that we receive, there is a multitude of business models and incredibly exciting opportunities to invest. And as my sort of panel speakers have been saying, Latin America is a leader, and within that sphere, there are many areas, whether it be tourism, whether it be commodity, whether it be sustainable fisheries, blue carbon, that all represent an incredibly exciting opportunity to invest for a financial return whilst delivering benefits to local communities and the environment. And that I think is a really key message. So do engage in the space.
Do engage. Maximiliano?
No, yeah, I'm glad that Divya said about this. Where I started my career was with the blue whales in Patagonia, in Corcovado, actually. So exactly. So, and one of the things I just want to reinforce this message that, sometimes nature is not on the spreadsheet, but the spreadsheet is made of nature, and we really need to account for what we are doing to nature. And more important than ever, it's how healthy that nature is too. It's not just as a resource, but as a healthy ecosystem that can allow us to live in this planet.
Thank you very much. Divya, one last word for the rest, for the audience?
I think from doing this work with the TNFD and in my role at S&P, there's so much interest from the financial community, and it's very much in like a learning mode, and I want to see people get into action mode now. So if you're thinking about it, feel free to speak with me about like case studies and how it's actually done. It's definitely possible, even if it is somewhat of a new topic for some investors.
No, thank you very much. Thank you, Divya. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Maximiliano. It has been a real pleasure. And I'm going to finish with this call to action from Divya that it's enforced, I'm sure, by the rest of the panel. And because there are enormous opportunities in this blue economy, and I would like also to reinforce that IDB Invest has a blue economy as a priority. Latin America is a leader region in this sense, and we want to help all our clients to continue and maintain this leadership position. Thank you very much to all of you.